Forest Ecosystems by Rachel Del Fave. In discussing ecosystems, an important term to understand is the food pyramid. Now, I don't mean the food pyramid in the cafeteria telling you to eat a bunch of apples. I'm talking about the relationship between all organisms residing in a specific biome. To simplify, a food pyramid is a model that shows how food and energy cycles through an ecosystem. The basic food pyramid is compiled of 5 parts. The first part is the decomposers. The decomposers are at the bottom of the pyramid. They are organisms in the soil that eat or recycle the dead and decaying material, such as dead plants and forest animals. A few examples of decomposers are worms and bacteria. Above decomposers, there are the producers. The producers are organisms that take in energy via photosynthesis and store it in food. Some examples of producers are trees and grasses, although there are many more. Then, there are the primary consumers. Consumers are organisms that get their energy and sustenance by consuming other organisms. Producers. A few examples of primary consumers are mice, insects, and rats. However, there are many more. Next, above primary consumers, there are the secondary consumers. They also get their energy via consuming other organisms, primary consumers, and producers. A few examples of secondary consumers are rabbits, birds, and squirrels. Tertiary consumers are at the very top of the pyramid. Similar to secondary and primary consumers, tertiary consumers also get their food and energy from consuming other organisms. However, because they are above secondary and primary consumers, they consume both producers and consumers. Some examples of tertiary consumers are humans and wolves. However, others exist. They are organized in this way to show the order that the food and energy cycles through the ecosystem. Now, let's talk about food chains and food webs. Although food pyramids are a convenient way to order information about feeding relations within biomes/ecosystems, there are 2 other ways that scientists organize this information. These 2 ways are food chains and food webs. First, there are food chains. Food chains also show decomposers, consumers, and producers, but do not always label them. Food chains have a very literal name. The food chains look like chain links, starting with the decomposers and working its way towards the tertiary consumers at the very top. Also, there are food webs. Food webs are similar to food pyramid because they contain the orders of the decomposers, producers, and consumers. Food webs are models of feeding relationships between organisms in an ecosystem. Food webs are similar to a spider web with intersecting and overlapping lines to show food chain. Pictures. Let's take a look at some of the organisms that live in the forest. For example, here are some bacteria. Bacteria is just one of the many decomposers in a forest ecosystem. Other decomposers include earthworms and fungus. Some producers in a forest ecosystem include trees, such as these. Also, there are types of grasses and flowers. Some primary consumers in a forest ecosystem include rats, insects, and mice. Some secondary consumers in a forest ecosystem include rabbits, birds, and squirrels. Some tertiary consumers in a forest ecosystem include coyotes, hawks, and fisher cats. Now we'll talk about what I learned. During my research on this topic, I learned that no one organism is more important than the other. If one species were to be wiped out from a biome, that biome's ecosystem could collapse. This is why conservation is so important, even for less glamorous species such as earthworms, fungi, and fisher cats. For example, the lack of a decomposer could cause dead organisms to pile up and not decompose and release carbon and nitrogen. Lastly, we'll talk about how our system fits into the food pyramid. Our system fits into the food pyramid because it has several organisms that need food to survive. Our system food pyramid goes like this. Our decomposers are the snails and mealworms. The producers are the clovers, peas, grass, duckweed, and elodia. The primary consumers are the arthropods. The secondary consumers are also snails, and the tertiary consumers are the goldfish. Without one of these species, the system would most likely fail. Pictures courtesy of Google Images. Artwork courtesy of Aaron Delfaith. Information courtesy of Ecology. Book.